On a distant, isolated planet, far from the bustling centers of galactic civilization, a race of highly intelligent alien beings was struggling against time. Their world, once full of life and innovation, had been struck by a series of devastating natural disasters. Earthquakes shook their cities, volcanic eruptions ravaged their landscapes, and fierce storms tore through their once peaceful atmosphere. In a desperate attempt to survive, the alien leaders sent out urgent distress signals to every known civilization across the stars. The alien species, known as the Zarans, had always been a proud and self-sufficient people. They had built their cities high above the ground, using advanced technology and engineering to thrive in the most hostile of environments. But now, they were facing an enemy they could not fight, a planet that was dying beneath their feet. The Zarans had no choice but to reach out to others for help. They broadcast their distress call, hoping that someone, anyone, would respond. The message spread across the galaxy, reaching civilizations both near and far. However, as the Zarans waited, days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. No help came. Leaders of nearby planets debated whether they should intervene. Many felt it was not their responsibility to assist the Zarans. The galaxy was vast, and resources were scarce. No one could afford to help a species that had never been part of their alliances. Governments weighed their own survival first. The Zarans were seen as a dying race, nothing more than a lost cause. The Galactic Council, a powerful governing body, refused to take action, fearing the costs would be too great. The Zarans were left to face their fate alone. But then, from an unexpected source, help came. On a small research station orbiting a neighboring planet, Marcus Klein, a human explorer, sat at his console when he intercepted the Zaran distress signal. Unlike the others, Marcus didn't ignore it. Instead, he sat up straighter in his seat, the hum of his station fading into the background as he focused on the message. He understood the situation immediately. His heart raced as the urgency in the Zaran message hit him. He glanced at the data on his screen. Planetary systems destabilizing, resources depleting, and lives being lost every day. The Zarans were in grave danger, and no one was coming to help them. The humans had long prided themselves on their compassion, on their willingness to fight for what was right. It was clear that the galaxy's leaders had chosen to turn their backs on the Zarans, but Marcus knew he couldn't do that. He couldn't just sit by while an entire species faced extinction. Marcus stood up and began to pace in front of his console. He knew that taking action wasn't simple. He was a lone explorer in a remote part of the galaxy, far from Earth and from any official command. His station wasn't equipped for a mission like this, and yet the thought of doing nothing felt wrong. He could send a message to Earth, try to get approval, gather a fleet of ships, and then launch a rescue mission, but that would take far too long. By the time Earth responded, the Zarans could be gone. There was no time to waste. "Maybe I can do this alone," Marcus muttered to himself, almost as if he were speaking to the walls of the station. He didn't need a fleet of ships or a team of experts. What he had was his determination, and that was enough. At least, he hoped it would be. The thought of the Zarans' suffering haunted him. He had been trained as an explorer and had seen his fair share of disasters. Planets ravaged by war, species wiped out by plague, entire civilizations brought to the brink of extinction. But this felt different. The Zarans weren't asking for military help or weapons. They weren't seeking revenge or political alliances. They just wanted to survive. They wanted a chance to rebuild their world. Marcus knew what he had to do. He wasn't going to sit by and wait for someone else to take action. He was going to help. He rushed to prepare his ship, a small but capable craft equipped for long-range travel. He knew it would be a difficult journey, but he wasn't afraid. What mattered was that someone cared. Someone was willing to step in when no one else would. As Marcus loaded supplies and equipment into the ship, a sense of resolve settled over him. This wasn't just about saving the Zarans. It was about proving to the galaxy that humanity was different. They wouldn't stand by and let a species perish. They would help, even if it meant risking everything. The journey would be long, and the challenges ahead would be immense. But Marcus was ready. He had no idea what he would find when he arrived. But one thing was clear. No one else had come to the Zaren's aid. No one, except for him and humanity. With a final look at his console, Marcus boarded his ship, set the coordinates, and initiated the launch sequence. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that whatever happened, humanity would be the ones to make a difference. Marcus Klein's ship rocketed through the quiet void of space, its engines humming steadily as it cut through the stars toward the Zaren homeworld. The distress signal had been clear. There was no time to waste. The alien species was on the brink of extinction, and no one had come to help. Not until Marcus, a lone human explorer, had decided to act. As the ship moved further from the safety of his research station, Marcus couldn't help but wonder if he was making a mistake. He'd never been in a situation like this before. Yes, he had seen war and disaster in the galaxy, but never had he been called to help a species on the verge of extinction, with no backup and no clear plan. He had only his instincts and a deep belief in humanity's ability to make a difference. He sat alone in the cockpit, staring out at the black expanse of space. The stars looked peaceful, distant. For a moment, he almost wished he could turn the ship around and return to the safety of his station. But he knew that wasn't an option. He had made his choice, and there was no going back. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft ping from the console. A message had come through. A reply from Earth. Marcus' heart skipped a beat as he read the short, blunt response from his superiors. Marcus, we understand the gravity of the situation, but your mission is too risky. The Zaren crisis does not fall within our jurisdiction. Your actions could escalate tensions in the galaxy. Return immediately and await further orders. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment, the words weighing heavily on his chest. His superiors didn't understand. They were focused on politics, boundaries, and alliances. But to Marcus, it wasn't about politics. It was about doing what was right. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity was capable of something greater than war or conquest. The Zarens needed help, and he couldn't stand by while they suffered. He typed a quick reply, but after a few seconds, he deleted it. There was no point in arguing with them. They weren't there, and he couldn't waste time trying to convince them. He was already on his way, and he would see this mission through. He leaned back in his seat, taking a deep breath. He knew that what he was doing wasn't easy, and it wasn't without risk. The Zarens were a highly advanced species, but they had never been part of the galactic alliances. Marcus couldn't predict how they would react to his arrival. Would they welcome him with open arms? Or would they view him as another potential threat, just like every other civilization that had ignored their pleas? A part of him hoped for the best. After all, he was bringing aid, offering help where no one else would. But another part of him feared the worst. Would the Zarens be suspicious of his intentions? Could he really trust that they would accept humanity's help? Marcus shook his head, pushing those doubts aside. There was no time for hesitation. The Zarens needed him, and he had already made his choice. The journey felt long, and each passing moment brought a new wave of uncertainty. The vast emptiness of space stretched out before him, and Marcus couldn't help but feel small in the grand scheme of things. He was just one person, just one ship. What difference could he possibly make in the face of such a monumental crisis? He glanced at the communication console again. The Zaren signal was still active, still desperate. He read the message once more. Please, help us. Our world is dying. We have no one else. That was what kept him going. The words echoed in his mind as the stars outside the cockpit window blurred into a streak of light. He was more than just a person traveling through space. He was a symbol of what humanity could do. He wasn't alone. He had the strength of countless others who believed in making a difference. He was human, and that meant something. The ship entered the Zaren system, and Marcus prepared for the next phase of the mission. The planet came into view, a beautiful blue and green orb surrounded by swirling storms. It looked like Earth, but with darker clouds and a sense of urgency in the air. The damage was clear from orbit. Large sections of the planet's surface had been scorched by volcanic activity, and the once thriving cities were now crumbling ruins. Marcus couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. This planet had once been home to a proud and powerful civilization, but now it was on the brink of collapse. The Czarans had lived in harmony with their planet for centuries, using their advanced technology to protect the environment and maintain a delicate balance. But now, that balance had been shattered. The ship's sensors began to pick up signals from the planet below, and Marcus's heart quickened. He was getting closer, but he wasn't sure what to expect. Would he be met with hostility? Would the Czarans even trust him enough to let him help? His hand hovered over the controls, ready to make a course adjustment. He could land anywhere. There were no established landing zones. He would have to make a decision, and fast. Taking a deep breath, Marcus punched in the coordinates. It was time to make contact. The ship descended toward the planet's surface, the atmosphere rippling with turbulence. Marcus braced himself, knowing that this was just the beginning. Whatever happened next, he would stand by his decision. He was humanity's hope for the Czarans. There was no turning back now. As Marcus's ship descended through the turbulent atmosphere of the Czaran planet, the view below grew more chaotic. The once beautiful landscape was marred by the effects of natural disasters. The skies were filled with thick, dark clouds, swirling with storms that had torn apart cities and left the land in ruins. The Czaran planet, once a symbol of harmony between technology and nature, now seemed like a broken shell of its former self. Marcus's ship cut through the clouds and finally broke through into clearer skies, giving him a brief moment of peace as he gazed down at the world below. The landscape was a mixture of mountains, forests, and deserts, but much of it seemed to be dying, abandoned by those who once called it home. Steady, Marcus murmured to himself as he adjusted the ship's controls. He had studied the planet's terrain before leaving Earth, but nothing could prepare him for the sight of it in person. The Czarans had always been an advanced species, their cities built high above the ground to avoid natural disasters. But now most of their cities were in ruins, and the survivors were scattered, struggling to survive. The landing was rough, as the planet's surface had been destabilized by the ongoing disasters. Marcus skillfully guided the ship down into a clearing, far from any known settlements. He knew the Czarans might be hesitant to approach a strange ship, especially one from a species they'd never interacted with before. This was a delicate moment. He had to make sure his first contact with them was one of trust, not fear. The ship's landing gear touched down with a thud, and the engines powered down. Marcus sat in silence for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. He had arrived. Now, the hard part began. He grabbed his equipment and made his way to the airlock. As the doors hissed open, he stepped out onto the surface of the planet. The air was thick with humidity, and the scent of the earth was heavy in the atmosphere. The air felt different here, charged with a tension that was impossible to ignore. It was as if the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. Marcus surveyed his surroundings. The clearing where he had landed was quiet, eerily so. There was no sign of life, no welcoming party. He had expected that. The Czarans were a proud people, and they wouldn't simply trust any outsider, especially not a human, without good reason. But Marcus wasn't just any outsider. He had come to help, and he hoped they would see that. He activated his communication device and broadcast a simple message in the Czaran language, one he had learned before the journey. "I come in peace. I bring help. Please, let me assist you." For a long moment, there was no response. Marcus stood still, his eyes scanning the surroundings, waiting. He felt the weight of the silence. Was he too late? Had the Czarans already given up hope? Just as he began to doubt, a soft sound broke the stillness. The rustling of leaves, followed by the unmistakable footsteps of someone, or something, approaching. Marcus stiffened, his instincts on high alert. He wasn't sure what to expect. Could this be the Czarans, or some hostile group trying to protect their territory? From behind a cluster of trees, a figure emerged. The alien stood tall and slender, with skin that shimmered like polished silver under the weak sunlight. The Zaran's eyes were large and dark, with an intensity that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. The alien's clothing was simple but elegant, designed to blend into the natural environment. This was no warrior or soldier. This was someone important, someone who held power. The Zaran stopped a few meters away, studying Marcus carefully. Neither of them moved for a long moment. The silence between them was thick, full of questions and uncertainty. Finally, the Zaran spoke, their voice soft but commanding. "Who are you, human? What is it that you seek on our dying world?" Marcus felt a surge of relief that they had finally spoken. He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I am Marcus Klein, a human explorer. I've come to offer help. Your world is in danger, and I can provide resources, technology, and aid to help you rebuild. I ask only that you allow me to assist you." The Zaran tilted their head slightly, as if considering his words. The silence stretched out again, and Marcus wondered if he had made a mistake. Was it too soon to ask for their trust? "Why should we trust you?" the Zaran asked, their voice tinged with suspicion. "Many have come before you, claiming to offer help. None of them stayed. None of them cared for us when we needed it most." Marcus felt a pang of sadness at the Zaran's words. It was clear that they had been betrayed before, left alone to fend for themselves. He could understand their hesitation. It wasn't easy to trust someone who had never been part of their world, especially after so much pain. "I know that your people have suffered," Marcus said, his voice steady. "But I am different. I come from Earth, a place where we value compassion, cooperation, and survival. I'm not here for power or glory. I'm here to help. Please, let me prove that." The Zaran studied him for a long moment, their eyes scanning his face as if searching for any sign of deception. Marcus held their gaze, not flinching, not backing down. He had nothing to hide. Finally, the Zaran spoke again, their voice softer this time. "We will allow you to stay. But know this, human, your actions will be watched. You must prove yourself worthy of our trust." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of their words. He knew this was just the beginning, and the road ahead would be difficult. But for the first time since he had received the distress signal, he felt hope stir within him. He wasn't alone anymore. The Zarans had agreed to let him help. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. And with that, Marcus took his first step into a world that needed saving. Marcus stood quietly in the heart of the Zaran settlement, feeling the weight of the trust the alien species had given him. He had been allowed to stay, and now it was time to prove himself worthy. The Zarans had shown no immediate hostility, but they were cautious. Every step he took seemed to be watched, and every word he spoke was weighed carefully. He understood their skepticism. After all, no one had come to help them in their time of need. He had begun working with a small group of Zaran engineers to assess the damage to the infrastructure, trying to find ways to stabilize their environment and prevent further catastrophes. The human technology he brought had already made an impact. In just a few days, they had managed to repair a key water filtration system that had been damaged beyond repair. It was a small victory, but it showed the Zarans that humanity had something valuable to offer. But not all Zarans were eager to accept Marcus's help. A faction of Zarans, led by a woman named Trelia, a high-ranking official, had made it clear from the start that they were not interested in outside assistance. She was proud, and she viewed the humans' presence with suspicion, seeing it as a form of interference rather than aid. While others in the settlement were beginning to trust Marcus, Trelia's distrust ran deep. "They've come to control us, not to help us," Trelia said in a hushed voice, speaking to a small group of her closest allies. "They pretend to be saviors, but what they truly want is to take what's left of our world and claim it for themselves." Her words spread quickly through the community, sowing seeds of doubt. While Marcus worked tirelessly to restore basic infrastructure, rumors about his true intentions began to grow. Some Czarans started to question whether humanity was truly acting out of compassion or if there were darker motives at play. Marcus could feel the tension in the air as he moved through the settlement. He wasn't blind to the fact that there were those who saw his presence as a threat, and it made his work even harder. He had come here to help, but it seemed as though every step forward was met with resistance from those who couldn't or wouldn't see past their fear. It wasn't just Trelia's group. Even some of the other Zaran leaders, who had initially agreed to work with Marcus, were starting to waver. They hadn't known the true extent of the damage to their planet, and some wondered if it was even possible to save what remained. The planet's atmosphere was unstable, and the once thriving ecosystems were decaying at an alarming rate. It wasn't clear whether any amount of technology could truly reverse the damage. Some believed that the Zarans were destined for extinction, and no amount of outside help could change that. Marcus had spent the past few days trying to build trust, showing the Zarans that humanity's help was not an effort to control them. He shared his knowledge freely, working alongside Zaran engineers to develop new ways to preserve their planet's resources. Yet the questions kept coming. Was this just a temporary fix? Would the humans leave once their mission was complete? Would they simply abandon the Zarans, just like everyone else had? One evening, Marcus found himself standing in front of a council of Zaran leaders, including Trelia, as they debated the future of their people. Trelia's voice was the loudest, and her words were filled with anger. "I understand your desperation," Trelia said, her eyes fixed on Marcus. "But you must understand ours. You humans think you can just waltz in and fix everything. But what do you know of our history, of our people? We have survived for centuries without the aid of others. Why should we trust you now?" Marcus took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He knew that Trelia's words were not just about him. They were about the Zarans' deep-rooted fear and pride. For centuries, they had been independent, relying on their own technology and resources to survive. The idea that they now had to rely on another species was unbearable to some. "I don't claim to know everything about your history," Marcus said slowly. "But I do know one thing. Your world is dying. I came here not to take control, but to help, to offer what humanity can. I'm not asking you to forget your past. I'm asking you to see that the future doesn't have to be bleak." Trelia's gaze never wavered. "And if you fail, what happens then, human? If your technology isn't enough, what will you leave behind? Another failure, another shattered promise." The room fell silent. Marcus knew that Trelia's questions were valid. What if his efforts weren't enough? What if the Zarans were too far gone? He had no clear answers, only the promise that he would do everything he could to make a difference. "I can't promise you that everything will be fixed in a day," Marcus said, "but I can promise that we will try. I'm not here to leave you with false hope. I'm here because I believe in what we can do together. If you'll give me that chance, I'll prove it." There was a long pause before the other leaders began to speak. Slowly, the room shifted, and the debate moved beyond accusations and fear. Some of the leaders who had been silent up until now began to speak in support of Marcus. They had seen the progress he had made in just a few days, and they understood that humanity's help might be their only hope. Trelia, though still skeptical, remained silent for the time being. It was clear that she wasn't ready to accept Marcus's help, but the others had made their decision. The council agreed to allow the humans to continue their work, though it was under the strictest supervision. It was a small step forward, but it was a step nonetheless. As Marcus left the council hall that evening, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle had just begun. It wasn't just about fixing the planet anymore. It was about changing the way the Zarans saw themselves and their place in the galaxy. They had been alone for so long, and now they had to learn how to trust again. But despite the resistance, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be difficult, but humanity had already shown that they were capable of bringing hope when there seemed to be none. And for Marcus, That was all the reason he needed to keep fighting. Days turned into weeks as Marcus and his team worked alongside the Czarans to try to restore what had been lost. The planet's surface remained scared, the atmosphere still unstable, and the cities that had once been centers of technological achievement were now empty shells, abandoned by those who had once lived in them. Yet despite the overwhelming challenges, Marcus had never felt more determined. He knew that humanity's resourcefulness and creativity might be the key to turning things around. At the heart of their efforts was a massive project to stabilize the planet's weather systems, which had been ravaged by centuries of natural disasters. The Zaran technology that had once kept their world balanced had faltered, and now it was up to the humans to find a solution. While the Czarans had once been proud of their self-sufficiency, the assistance of Marcus's team was slowly becoming a necessity. Yet even with that growing dependence, Marcus could sense a change in the Czarans. One by one, they were beginning to see the value in humanity's innovation. Marcus came the voice of Jorik, a young Zaran engineer who had been working closely with him. "I think I've figured it out. The data from your atmospheric stabilizer seems to fit perfectly with our own weather control systems. If we adjust the settings just a little, we might be able to reverse some of the damage." Marcus smiled, glad to see that Jorik was finally feeling confident about the project. The young engineer had been one of the most skeptical Czarans when Marcus first arrived, but over time, he had started to trust Marcus and the humans' abilities. Now, Jorik's enthusiasm was contagious. "That's great news," Marcus replied. "Let's run the simulation and see if it works." The two of them moved quickly to a nearby console, where Jorik began inputting the data. The Czarans had their own systems, of course, but Marcus had found ways to make his own technology work alongside them. It had taken some time to get their equipment to communicate, but with every successful test, the Czarans were becoming more willing to accept human ideas. Soon, the simulation began to run, and Marcus watched as the data poured in. The projections were promising. The weather systems might just be salvageable, but they would need more time. Still, this was the most hopeful sign they had seen in weeks. "We're on the right track," Marcus said with a nod, feeling a surge of relief. "Let's get started on the real thing." The next few days were a blur of activity. Marcus and his team worked around the clock, setting up the stabilizers and working with the Zaran engineers to implement the changes. It wasn't easy. Nothing about this mission had been. But as the weather systems began to stabilize, hope started to spread through the settlement. One evening, Marcus stood outside the settlement, looking out over the planet's surface. The sky had cleared, and the sun was finally breaking through the thick clouds. For the first time since he had arrived, the planet seemed to be breathing again, slowly recovering from the damage it had endured. The winds had calmed, and the once chaotic storms were starting to fade. Jorik walked up beside him, his face tired but full of pride. "You did it," he said. "You really did it." Marcus smiled, though he knew it wasn't just him. It had been a group effort. The Czarans had contributed just as much as the humans had, and it was their combined creativity and determination that had made this possible. Still, the fact that they had made real progress made Marcus feel like they were on the right path. "This is just the beginning," Marcus said, his eyes still fixed on the horizon. "We've still got a lot of work to do, but we're getting closer." Over the next few weeks, more and more of the Zaran people came forward to offer their help. Many had remained distrustful of Marcus and his team at first, but as the planet's weather systems began to improve, their fears began to dissipate. Even Trilia, the most vocal opponent of Marcus's mission, was beginning to soften. She had seen the results with her own eyes. While she still wasn't entirely convinced that humanity's involvement would guarantee the planet's future, she no longer saw them as enemies. One afternoon, as Marcus and Jorik worked together in the settlement, Trilia approached them. Her posture was stiff, her eyes wary, but there was a slight change in her demeanor. She wasn't the same person who had stood against them so fiercely in the beginning. "Marcus," she began, her voice calm but measured, I want to apologize for my distrust. It is difficult for us to accept help, especially after so many have turned their backs on us. But I've seen the work you've done, and it's impressive. You and your team have earned my respect." Marcus nodded, grateful for her words. He knew how hard it was for someone like Trilia to admit that they needed help. It took a great deal of courage to let go of old beliefs and accept that there might be a way forward, especially when it meant trusting someone from another world. "I understand," Marcus said, "and I'm glad we could prove that we're here to help. You're not alone anymore." Trilia's expression softened, though she still held a sense of pride in her posture. "Perhaps we were wrong to think we could do it all on our own. The galaxy is full of worlds, and we must learn to work together. If you and your people are willing, we will do the same." It was a simple statement, but it carried great weight. For the first time, Marcus felt that the Zarans were ready to work with humanity, not just accept help, but truly collaborate. They were learning to trust again, to put aside their old fears, and to embrace the possibility of a future where they weren't alone. As the days went on, the planet continued to show signs of recovery. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And that was enough for Marcus. He had come here to help, but now he realized the Zarans weren't just accepting help, they were becoming partners in the effort. Together, they had already accomplished something that no one thought was possible. The road ahead would still be difficult. There was much more work to be done. But for the first time, Marcus allowed himself to believe that they could truly save the Zaran world. And that was all the reason he needed to keep moving forward. The days had begun to blend together in a way that only long, hard work could manage. Marcus and his team had settled into a routine, working side by side with the Zarans, trying to restore the balance on their world. The progress they had made in stabilizing the weather systems was promising, but it was clear that the planet's recovery was far from complete. There were still so many obstacles ahead, but now there was a growing sense of unity among the humans and Zarans. At the heart of their efforts was the collaborative spirit that had developed between the two species. While there were still a few skeptics, the majority of the Zaran population had come to accept the humans' help. Even Trilia, who had once opposed Marcus with such fierce determination, was now working closely with him, offering advice and ideas. She still maintained her proud demeanor, but her eyes no longer held the same suspicion. There was a trust beginning to form, fragile but real. The human team had introduced new methods of resource management, improving the efficiency of energy usage and water filtration, which allowed the Zarans to conserve their dwindling supplies. They had worked together to repair old power plants, to rebuild broken roads, and to restore communication networks that had been down for years. Every success, no matter how small, was a victory, a reminder that they were making progress, even when the path forward felt uncertain. One evening, as Marcus sat at a makeshift table in the main hall of the settlement, he reviewed the day's data. It wasn't the clean, polished reports he was used to back on Earth. The data was rough, incomplete, but still promising. He could see the results of the repairs in the air, in the landscape, in the way the Zarans had begun to come together, working side by side with the humans. It was a subtle shift, but it was real. Jorik, the young Zaran engineer who had been one of Marcus's first supporters, walked up to the table. "Marcus," he said, his voice filled with excitement, "I think we've finally found the solution to the energy problem. We've managed to reverse the damage to the central reactor, and now it's producing power more efficiently than ever. This could give us the energy we need to keep the stabilization projects running." Marcus looked up, a wide grin spreading across his face. "That's incredible, Jorik. You and the team have done amazing work. This is exactly what we need to keep pushing forward." Jorik's eyes gleamed with pride, but he quickly glanced around, lowering his voice. "There's something else, Marcus. The other engineers and I have been talking. We think that we might be able to use the same technology we've repaired to help regenerate the soil, the forests, and the ecosystems. If we can restore the planet's natural cycles, We could stop the planet from deteriorating any further. Marcus felt a rush of excitement. If they could restore the natural systems, the planet might have a real chance at recovery. It was a risky plan, but if it worked, it could change everything. This could be it, Marcus said, his mind racing with possibilities. How soon do you think we can start? We'll need some time to prepare, Jorik replied. But with the new power source, I think we can get started right away. Marcus nodded, his heart swelling with hope. He knew the task was monumental, and there were still many challenges to face. But now he felt the faintest glimmer of optimism. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting for something greater, to bring life back to a dying world. As the weeks passed, the Zaran and human teams began to work together more closely than ever before. Marcus was amazed by how quickly they adapted to one another's methods, blending human ingenuity with Zaran technology. The two species were no longer separate entities working in isolation. They had become a united front, fighting for the future of the planet they shared. Even Trilia, once the most vocal critic of humanity's involvement, had come around. She spent more time with Marcus now, and they began to form a professional bond, built on mutual respect. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. For the first time, Trilia began to see the humans not as outsiders or conquerors, but as allies. And that was a victory, no matter how small. One afternoon, as Marcus and Jorik oversaw the testing of the new energy system, Trilia approached them with a small group of Zaran leaders. She looked at Marcus, her face serious but softened by a look of approval. "We've been watching," she said, her voice steady. "The efforts of your people have been remarkable. You've brought new ideas, new technologies, and most importantly, hope. It's clear that we need each other. I came here to say thank you." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't just gratitude, it was recognition. Recognition that their efforts, their hard work, had finally paid off. The Zarans were no longer looking at them with suspicion. They were looking at them with trust. "We're just getting started," Marcus replied, his voice filled with determination. "But if we keep working together, we'll rebuild this planet, and we'll make sure that this never happens again." Trilia nodded, her eyes meeting his. "I believe you," she said quietly. "We believe you." With that, the barrier between them finally began to crumble. The walls of doubt that had once separated humanity and the Zarans were being torn down by their shared efforts. It wasn't just about saving the planet anymore. It was about creating a future where both species could work side by side, united by a common cause. As the sun set over the settlement, casting a warm glow over the restored fields, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had come to this planet as an outsider, a stranger, but now he felt like part of something much bigger. He wasn't just a human helping the Zarans. He was part of a new alliance, one built on hope, trust, and shared determination. The road ahead would still be difficult, but for the first time, Marcus truly believed they could succeed. Together, humanity and the Zarans had proven that even in the darkest of times, they could unite for the greater good. And that, above all, was what would carry them through. The months had passed in a whirlwind of hard work, determination, and progress. Marcus and his team, alongside the Zarans, had fought against time and the forces of nature to restore a world on the brink of collapse. Their efforts had started to show remarkable results. The weather systems were stable, the power plants were functioning, and the natural environment was slowly but surely regenerating. It was clear that they had accomplished more than anyone had ever expected. The Zaran planet was coming back to life. Yet, despite all of their successes, Marcus knew they were only at the beginning. There was still so much to do. The planet's ecosystems were delicate, and the restoration process would take years. But what had started as a mission of aid had grown into something more, a partnership. Humanity and the Zarans had become allies, bound by a shared goal and the trust they had built through months of work together. The human team had made a lasting impact, not just with their technology, but with their way of thinking. They didn't just repair what was broken. They looked at the world and thought about ways to make it better. Marcus had encouraged the Czarans to adopt new ways of thinking about sustainability, focusing on long-term solutions instead of short-term fixes. He had shown them that there was more to rebuilding a world than just fixing broken systems. It was about changing the way they lived, the way they interacted with the environment, and the way they saw each other. The settlement was bustling with activity as the combined human-Zaran teams worked on the final stages of the project. Buildings were being rebuilt, fields were being replanted, and the skies, once dark and stormy, were now clear and peaceful. The Czarans were beginning to believe in a future where their planet could thrive once again, a future where they no longer had to fight just to survive. One morning, as Marcus walked through the settlement, he saw Trelia standing near the edge of a newly restored field, watching the workers plant crops in the rich soil. The sun was shining brightly, and the air felt fresh, almost alive. She turned as she heard him approach. "Marcus," Trelia greeted him, her voice calm but full of pride. "The harvests are starting to look good. The soil is finally rich again. It's hard to believe that just a few months ago, we were losing everything." Marcus smiled, feeling the warmth of her words. "It's incredible how much we've accomplished together. You've done as much as we have, Trelia. This is your planet too. I just helped show you that the future can be better." Trelia nodded, her eyes softening. "You humans, you really believe in change, don't you? You came here with nothing but a promise to help. And now look at what we've built. It's more than I ever thought possible." Marcus looked around at the settlement, feeling a deep sense of pride. They had done it. The planet was on its way to recovery, and the people were beginning to heal from the trauma of the past. It was no longer just a question of survival. They were thinking about the future, about growth and prosperity. "I didn't do it alone," Marcus said. "It was all of us. We're a team, and without the Czarans' help and trust, none of this would have been possible." Trelia smiled at him, a rare expression of warmth. "Maybe we were wrong to turn our backs on others before, but we've learned something valuable. That sometimes the future is brighter when we come together." As the weeks turned into months, the partnership between humanity and the Czarans grew stronger. Marcus continued to work alongside the Czarans, not just as an outsider, but as a valued ally. He had become part of their world, and they had become part of his. Together, they had accomplished something that had seemed impossible. They had given the Zaran planet a second chance. But despite the victories, Marcus knew that the work wasn't finished. The world was recovering, yes, but there was always more to be done. There were still areas of the planet that needed attention, still ecosystems to be restored. The task ahead would be long, but it was a task they would face together. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus stood outside the settlement, looking up at the stars. The vastness of space always made him feel small, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, he felt like part of something much bigger. The galaxy was full of untold challenges, but humanity had proven something. They had shown that when pushed to the brink, they could rise to the occasion, not through power or force, but through empathy, ingenuity, and collaboration. As he stood there, he felt a presence beside him. He turned to see Trelia, standing next to him, gazing up at the same stars. "This isn't the end, is it?" she asked quietly. Marcus shook his head, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. "No, it's just the beginning. There's still so much more to do, and I know we'll do it together. Humanity and the Czarans. We'll face whatever comes next." Trelia nodded. "We've learned that we don't have to face the future alone. And maybe that's the most important lesson of all." Marcus felt a sense of peace wash over him as the stars twinkled above. The future was uncertain, as it always had been, but for the first time, he felt ready for it. Together, humanity and the Czarans had done the impossible. And together, they would continue to build a future, one of unity, hope, and resilience. As the night grew darker and the stars above burned brightly, Marcus realized that this planet, this world, was no longer just a mission. It was home, and he would do whatever it took to protect it.